trusted pharmacist built a $2.5 million empire on fake military contracts. But when her husband scheduled a flight to uncover her lies, she used her medical expertise to murder him. Subscribe now and dive into the terrifying true story of a devotion that turned deadly. In the heart of Raleigh County, West Virginia, reputation was a currency just as valuable as the dollar. Nestled within the close-knit communities of the Appalachian region, Daniels was the kind of town where generations overlapped, neighbors kept tabs on each other, and trust was given unconditionally once it was earned. It was here that Michael Brandon Cochran and Natalie Page Jessup built what looked, from any superficial angle, to be the quintessential American success story. Michael, born in Beckley in 1980, was an imposing figure with a reputation for gentle integrity. Raised largely as an only child, his life changed around the age of 8 when his stepfather, Ed Bolt, entered the picture, forging a lifelong bond grounded in mutual respect and sports. Michael was a natural athlete, playing baseball, basketball, and football through his boyhood. By high school, his dedication to fitness led him to win a regional powerlifting championship, turning his physique and his lifelong commitment to health into a core piece of his identity. It was during his late teens that Michael met Natalie Jessup while she was working at a local sporting goods store. Both went on to attend West Virginia University, where Michael studied information technology and Natalie pursued a degree in pharmacy. By November 1999, during their very first semester, they were engaged, and by May 2000, they were married. Over the next 17 years, the couple deeply embedded themselves into the social fabric of Raleigh County. They welcomed 2 children, Nicole and Ashton, and Michael became a pillar of youth athletics. To the local community, he wasn't just an IT professional, he was Coach Mike, the man who spent his evenings and weekends on the sidelines, present and deeply invested. When a young boy in the neighborhood tragically lost his father, it was Michael who stepped into the vacuum, taking the grieving child fishing and driving him to baseball practices to ensure he never felt alone. But while Michael was building a legacy of genuine community service, his wife was quietly trading on her professional status to build an illusion. As a licensed pharmacist, Natalie possessed immediate, unshakable credibility. In a region often ravaged by the opioid crisis, a pharmacist was a gatekeeper of health, a rigorously vetted professional whom the community trusted with their lives. Natalie wore that respect like armor, utilizing it to shield her next, incredibly dark venture. In 2017, the family trajectory appeared to skyrocket when Natalie announced a major career pivot. She stepped away from the pharmacy counter to become the majority owner and CEO of 2 new entities, Tactical Solutions Group (TSG) and Technology Management Solutions (TMS). Michael held a minor stake, relying entirely on his wife's perceived business acumen to guide the enterprise. On paper, TSG was a juggernaut. Its sleek corporate website and polished brochures presented the company as a top-tier federal contractor, operating as an elite supplier to the United States Department of Defense. Natalie openly told friends, family, and potential investors that her business model was directly inspired by the Hollywood movie War Dogs, the true story of young, ambitious entrepreneurs who successfully navigated legal loopholes to win millions in massive military supply contracts. To the residents of Raleigh County, it sounded like a thrilling, once-in-a-lifetime financial wave. What absolutely nobody knew outside of Natalie's private calculations was that the entire enterprise was built on thin air. According to federal investigators, Tactical Solutions Group had never been awarded a single federal or state government contract. The sister company, TMS, had managed to secure 2 minor state contracts, but both were promptly terminated by West Virginia authorities due to repeated, chronic delays and non-performance. The defense contracting empire was a ghost. But Natalie possessed a masterful gift for bureaucratic forgery. To maintain the illusion of legitimacy, she actively stole the identifying information of real individuals working within major banking institutions and government agencies. She created a vast, highly sophisticated digital paper trail, sending prospective investors official-looking emails, falsified contract awards, and doctored financial statements that appeared to originate from legitimate federal offices. With this bulletproof facade, Natalie engineered a massive Ponzi scheme. She aggressively targeted those closest to her, persuading at least 11 local individuals to hand over their life savings, retirement accounts, and inheritance funds. The total investment pool rapidly grew to a staggering $2.5 million. Among those she ruthlessly deceived were her own friends, neighbors, and most tragically, Michael's own parents, Donna and Ed Bolt. The money poured into the Cochrans' accounts, and Natalie wasted no time creating an outward lifestyle that matched her fictional wealth. To the public, the defense contracts were clearly paying off. The couple acquired 3 expansive residential properties, multiple luxury motorcycles, and a highly coveted antique 1965 Shelby Cobra Classic car. They took lavish, globally mapped family vacations to destinations like Paris and Hawaii. On one bank loan application seeking an additional injection of $100,000, Natalie and Michael reportedly signed off on financial paperwork claiming that their business assets exceeded an astronomical $500 million. Despite the staggering influx of cash, subtle icy fractures began appearing long before the federal government took notice. Natalie had volunteered as the treasurer for the Shady Spring Youth Baseball League, managing funds meant entirely for local children's sports equipment and field maintenance. By late 2017, league board members noticed an inexplicable deficit following a major fundraiser. A private investigator named James Quisenberry was quietly brought in to look into the books. His findings were jarring. Funds legally earmarked for the children's baseball programs had been actively used to pay for personal shopping sprees at TJ Maxx and family dinners at Olive Garden. Because of the social politics of a small town, Natalie was never criminally charged over the missing youth baseball league money, but the incident planted a quiet, poisonous seed of doubt among a handful of locals. Yet, inside the walls of the Cochran home, Michael remained entirely blind to his wife's calculated deception. Former lead investigators later testified with absolute certainty that Michael Cochran had no knowledge that TSG was an illegal fraud. He was a minority partner who spent his days assisting with technical logistics and researching genuine government portals to look for legitimate contracts to bid on. He genuinely believed they were a high-flying corporate team. The very same elaborate lies, fabricated emails, and forged government documentation that Natalie was feeding to outside investors to rob them blind, she was also feeding to her own husband across the dinner table every single night. He was living in a meticulously constructed palace of lies, completely unaware that the foundation was already beginning to turn lethal. By the frosty arrival of early 2019, the walls of Natalie Cochran's meticulously constructed financial kingdom were rapidly closing in. The mathematical inevitability of a Ponzi scheme is that it always runs out of fresh oxygen. You cannot indefinitely rob Peter to pay Paul when Peter starts demanding his returns with an attorney on standby. The 11 local investors who had handed over $2.5 million of their life savings based entirely on Natalie's phantom contracts with the Department of Defense were no longer placated by smooth excuses and fabricated emails. They wanted their money, and they wanted it immediately. But the most dangerous threat to Natalie's freedom didn't come from a federal investigator or a disgruntled external investor. It came from inside her own home. Michael Cochran, her fiercely loyal husband of 19 years, was starting to ask his own hard questions. Text messages later analyzed by law enforcement painted a picture of a husband increasingly bewildered by the chaotic math of their household. Michael was watching a bizarre, irreconcilable gap open up between the massive sums investors claimed they had wired into the business and the actual cash flow at their disposal. He wasn't asking these questions out of suspicion of malice. He asked them as an earnest partner who completely believed the business was real. He simply could not comprehend why their immense wealth, supposedly hundreds of millions of dollars tied up in major financial institutions, continually faced arbitrary, agonizing delays. To pacify her husband and buy herself time, Natalie spun one final grand fiction. She told Michael that their vast fortunes, totaling hundreds of millions of dollars from government contracts, were temporarily frozen in a Bank of America account in Lynchburg, Virginia. To solve the bureaucratic gridlock once and for all, she promised that they would personally travel to the bank to meet face-to-face with corporate executives and finally unlock the funds. Michael was ecstatic. He immediately booked a private chartered flight scheduled to take off on the morning of February 6, 2019, heading directly to Virginia. To his best friend, Christopher Davis, Michael openly expressed his relief and excitement. This trip was going to be the vindication of all his hard work, the definitive proof that the empire his brilliant wife had built was everything she had ever promised. What Michael failed to realize was that stepping onto that plane meant a death sentence for Natalie's illusion. There was no money waiting in Lynchburg. There were no bank executives. If Michael walked into that bank and discovered the truth, the entire $2.5 million fraud would instantly evaporate, and Natalie would exchange her luxury homes for a prison cell. Natalie's countermove was swift, calculated, and terrifyingly cold. On the morning of February 6, the very day they were meant to take to the skis, Natalie quietly texted the charter pilot and canceled the flight, claiming she was too ill to travel. But while she was calling off the trip, a far more sinister plot was already unfolding inside the Cochran home. Earlier that morning, Natalie reached out to a neighbor, Jennifer Davis, claiming she was suffering from an acute medical episode and desperately needed insulin. Trusting the former local pharmacist implicitly, Jennifer packed insulin vials into a bag and her husband dropped them off at the Cochran residence on his way to work. Natalie claimed the medication was for her own immediate personal use. Instead, prosecutors would later demonstrate she weaponized her clinical pharmacy background to administer a silent, untraceable chemical strike against her own husband. At 12:21 p.m. that afternoon, Natalie texted a local contractor named Jason Bowen, asking him to come to the house immediately because Michael had suddenly fallen violently ill. When Bowen arrived, he walked into a horrific scene. Michael, a former powerlifting champion renowned for his robust physical fitness, was lying completely comatose on the kitchen floor. Bowen and his partner frantically attempted to rouse the unconscious man. They tried talking to him, shaking him, and even performed a sternum rub, a painful medical technique where a hard knuckle is ground firmly into the breastbone, designed to shock an unconscious person awake through sheer physical agony. Michael didn't even flinch. He was completely unresponsive. Rather than dialing 911, Natalie asked Bowen to simply help her lift Michael's heavy frame off the floor and place him on the living room couch. Shortly after, Natalie took a photograph of her husband slumped unconscious on the floor and sent it to Jennifer Davis. The image was deeply shocking, yet Natalie's demeanor remained chillingly detached. As the hours ticked away, more loved ones arrived at the house, horrified by Michael's deteriorating state. Stephanie Hamilton, a licensed physician assistant and close family friend, examined Michael on the couch. He was totally unresponsive and had involuntarily urinated on himself, a clear, textbook sign of severe, progressing neurological distress. Hamilton explicitly told Natalie that Michael was in extreme medical danger, offering to personally accompany her to the hospital to get emergency help. Natalie flatly refused. With a calculated, unbothered calm that horrified onlookers, she insisted that Michael was just exhausted from his intense supplement routine and simply needed to sleep it off. Christopher Davis also rushed to the house, joining the chorus of voices begging Natalie to call an ambulance. For hours, Natalie actively obstructed, delayed, and deflated every single attempt to secure professional medical intervention, effectively keeping her dying husband captive in his own living room while his brain starved for glucose. By the time Christopher Davis and others finally overrode Natalie's protests and forced Michael into a local hospital later that afternoon, catastrophic, irreversible damage had already been done. When doctors drew Michael's blood, his blood glucose level registered at an astonishingly low 21 milligrams per deciliter. To put that in perspective, a normal fasting blood sugar level hovers around 70 to 100 mg/dl. Anything below 55 mg/dl is considered a severe medical emergency. A blood sugar level of 21 is not merely dangerous, it is profoundly, almost uniformly fatal. It is a level where the human body shuts down, slipping into a deep, protective coma as the brain literally begins to starve to death. Prolonged, hours-long delay in medical treatment dictated by Natalie had sealed his fate. The catastrophic drop in blood sugar had triggered severe cerebral edema, profound, massive swelling of the brain tissue. The window for any meaningful medical intervention had slammed shut on the living room couch. Michael Brandon Cochran never woke up. He was transferred to a hospice care facility where 5 days later, on February 11, 2019, he took his final breath at the age of 38. To the grieving community of Raleigh County, Coach Mike's death was mourned as a sudden, inexplicable medical tragedy. In his obituary, the family asked that in lieu of traditional flowers, donations be made directly to the Shady Spring Middle School baseball team, a final heartbreaking nod to the youth sports league that Michael had poured his heart into. No one in the community suspected foul play. They surrounded the grieving widow with sympathy, completely unaware that the grieving pharmacist had just executed the perfect, silent murder to keep her multi-million-dollar secrets buried in the grave. Initially, the passing of Michael Cochran was treated by the community of Raleigh County as a heartbreaking medical anomaly. A healthy, robust youth sports coach had suffered a sudden, catastrophic plunge in blood sugar and slipped away. For months, Natalie wrapped herself in the protective cloak of a grieving widow, comforted by a town that still respected her status as a local pharmacist. But while the physical trail of her husband's death grew cold in a cemetery in Daniels, West Virginia, the massive financial investigation into her business dealings was gaining relentless momentum. By June 2019, just 4 months after Michael was laid to rest, federal authorities and the West Virginia State Police closed in on the Cochran home. Armed with search warrants targeting the $2.5 million fraud, agents meticulously combed through the residence. Tucked inside the family refrigerator, investigators discovered and logged a seemingly unremarkable item: a single vial of human insulin. At the time, neither Michael nor Natalie was diabetic, making the presence of the fast-acting medication highly unusual, though it did not immediately trigger a homicide charge. The hammer fell in September 2019 when Natalie was formally indicted on an array of federal charges including wire fraud, bankruptcy fraud, and money laundering. The trial preparation painted a picture of absolute, chilling ruthlessness. Investigators discovered that Natalie's greed was completely unbound by tragedy. She had actively pitched her fake military contracting business and hunted for new investors to rob even while her husband lay dying in the hospital, and she continued the scam long after his funeral. In September 2020, facing a mountain of electronic evidence, Natalie pleaded guilty to federal wire fraud and money laundering. By March 2021, she was sentenced to 135 months, more than 11 years, in federal prison and ordered to forfeit her stolen empire, including 2 luxury properties, her jewelry, and the prized 1965 Shelby Cobra. For the general public, it felt like the final chapter of a small-town con. But behind the scenes, state prosecutors and the FBI were quietly obsessed with the insulin vial pulled from her refrigerator. In a dramatic legal move, authorities successfully petitioned to have Michael Cochran's body exhumed 7 months after his burial. The initial exhumation autopsy presented a massive hurdle for the state. Due to advanced tissue decomposition over those 7 months, the medical examiner could not definitively locate injection sites or isolate insulin levels, officially classifying the cause and manner of death as undetermined. Natalie's defense team celebrated this as an insurmountable roadblock for the prosecution. Realizing they needed a bulletproof forensic case, prosecutors took a massive gamble. They temporarily dropped the initial murder charges to allow for highly advanced, specialized testing by renowned forensic pathologist Dr. Paul Uribe. The legal showdown finally arrived in January 2025 in the Raleigh County Circuit Court, with Special Judge H.L. Kirkpatrick presiding. Prosecutors Tom Truman and Ashley Ackord built a formidable circumstantial fortress against Natalie. They brought forward FBI chemists who testified that the liquid inside the recovered refrigerator vial was unequivocally human insulin, and the rubber stopper showed distinct puncture marks from a syringe. The trial transformed into a ferocious battle of medical experts. The defense, led by attorneys Matthew Victor and Stanley Selden, launched what prosecutors described as a schizophrenic approach. They aggressively argued that while Natalie was undoubtedly a financial fraudster, she was not a killer. They pointed heavily to the original inconclusive autopsy and tried to convince the jury that Michael, obsessed with his physical fitness, had a history of taking massive, dinner plate-sized piles of daily health supplements and illegal anabolic steroids smuggled from Mexico, suggesting his death was a tragic self-inflicted medical event. However, the state's forensic experts utterly demolished the defense's theories. Endocrinologist Dr. Diane Kroger testified that severe brain swelling was well underway by the time Michael reached the hospital, proving he had been left comatose for hours. Then came the definitive testimony of Dr. Paul Uribe. He stated that a blood glucose level of 21 mg/dl in an otherwise completely healthy, non-diabetic adult man was mathematically profound and medically impossible to achieve naturally. Dr. Uribe testified with absolute certainty that non-prescribed, external insulin had been introduced to Michael's body, officially declaring the manner of death a homicide. Prosecutor Tom Truman delivered a masterful closing argument, asking the jury to focus on 2 distinct numbers: 0 for the amount of evidence proving Michael was a sickly man, and 21 for the fatal blood sugar level that only an expert delivery of insulin could cause. Truman argued that Natalie backed into a corner, weaponized her professional pharmaceutical knowledge to eliminate the one man who was hours away from exposing her entire life of crime. On January 29, 2025, after a grueling 2-week trial, the jury walked out to deliberate. They returned in less than 2 hours with a resounding verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. The trial immediately shifted into the high-stakes mercy phase, a proceeding under West Virginia law where the jury decides if a first-degree murder convict will have a theoretical shot at parole after 15 years, or spend the rest of their natural life behind bars. Natalie's family fractured under the emotional weight. Her aging parents Larry and Daphne Jessup gave tearful testimonies pleading that her children needed their mother. Her daughter Nicole called Natalie her best friend and begged the jury for a sliver of hope for a future reunion. Natalie herself sat in stony silence, choosing not to make a personal appeal. The final, devastating blow came from Michael's mother, Donna Bolt. Standing before the court, she read a searing 8-page typewritten statement detailing the excruciating pain of losing her son to a woman they had loved and trusted for nearly 20 years. Donna looked directly at the court and branded Natalie a thief, a liar, a taker of life, and a doer of evil deeds, pleading, "Judge, please don't fall for her con." The jury deliberated for just over an hour. At 5:18 p.m. on January 30, 2025, they delivered their final answer: no mercy. Natalie Cochran was condemned to life in prison without any possibility of parole, sent to serve her days at the federal facility FCI Hazelton. Though Michael Cochran was gone, his tragic story left an indelible mark on the legal and medical landscape of West Virginia. In February 2025, deeply moved by the tragic delays that cost the youth coach his life, state lawmakers officially introduced House Bill 2789, legally enshrined as the Michael Brandon Cochran Act. The groundbreaking legislation mandates that all intensive care units across the state must automatically conduct advanced C-peptide insulin tests for any unconscious patient presenting with a blood glucose level below 49 mg/dl. Through this law, Michael's legacy ensures that the silent chemical weapon used to steal his life will never go undetected again, offering protection to future patients from the grave. Thanks for staying through. See you in the next case.